All right. So I wanted to do a video on Albrecht Dürer, an artist from the, I want to say mid 1400s, late 1400s to mid 1500s. He did most of his work, I guess, in woodcuts. Um, I don't exactly know the process of how that works, but it kind of gives it like this ink look, which I feel like a lot of artists tried to copy years after the effect after seeing his work, um, but couldn't quite, you know, copy it or emulate it or get their work to look exactly like it. Durer's an interesting one because he sort of is kind of left behind when you talk about great artists. You think about guys like Michelangelo and Da Vinci, and you don't kind of talk about Albert Dürer. Nobody really talks about Albert Dürer. I don't know why. He was a German artist, and I believe he actually ended up going, um, traveling to many different countries and learning different ways uh, to make art. And he was very, very different for his time. I mean, when we're talking about, I believe this was during the Renaissance era, and he was sort of making this very interesting, highly detailed art. So we're going to take a look at his stuff. Um, Obviously, it starts with his earlier stuff. I'm going to have to move this book around a lot to kind of, because it, for some weird reason, they do things like this, and then they flip it back over. I don't know why. But we're going to just kind of flip through his early work, and then we're going to I'm going to flip very quickly through his early work, and then sort of get to his later work. But you can tell in the beginning he was very, I feel like there wasn't a lot of formal training there. Um, I don't know, he might have just been one of those people who just kind of went, I want to be an artist, and tried to learn on his own, because I feel like his style is so different than what you would have been taught during the Renaissance era. Um, the proportions are very odd. The I don't know. It's just the figures are a bit stiff. His anatomy is off, but yet he's one of those artists to me that is just such an inspiration, and you can definitely tell inspired artists after him, because I think it was because his work was so different um, than what you saw, and I think people enjoyed seeing something very different. His use of drapery is just astonishing. I mean, he had this great understanding of how to, use drapery on the figure. So you can tell his proportions are quite off. Um, he gets better at it. He actually has like a proportion guide, and it's actually quite different than what you would see most artists of the time going by. I don't know. I don't remember if it's in this book, but it's definitely very different. I actually have seen some of his work in person, some of his woodcuts that have been transported onto paper, and it's about this size. I mean, it really is like kind of in this cube-like way, which is pretty cool. So it's not very different than what you would actually see in person. Of course, in person, you know, it's seeing it in person. You're seeing the actual work of the artist. There's something about seeing, you know, the original piece that's just very different. But I mean, you can see he uses a lot of line. It looks like pen line, like, that you would see with kind of like microns or things like what do we got here? Like this, like Copics. You get a very, you know, you get a line. I hate to draw in the book, but I'm going to. You get like lines like that, very thin lines, um, which is interesting. It's interesting how he was able to get very thin lines during that time. Um, yeah, just so much detail in his work. So much, he clearly understood perspective because it is following a perspective line. Doesn't look sloppy either. It looks like it's all very well planned out. Might be hard to see these. Can't wait till we get into his later work because it's, in my opinion, it's far better. Did a lot of religious stuff. You're going to see a lot of this. And you're going to see it slightly improved as we go on. I believe that's a self-portrait, or looks like a self-portrait. But also could be Jesus as well. Look at that. I love his anatomy, but his artwork is definitely very stiff. You kind of have to get past that. But I love his anatomy. He was clearly, a master of anatomy in his own way. He understood the rib cage, the shape of the rib cage. He understood how the muscles, interlocked with one another. The drapery is just amazing. I mean, when you see drapery like that, it just, you know you're looking at a master here. What an improvement from what we were looking at before. I think it has the years on it, but I'm not going to go that deep into it. Never mind. But, I mean, absolutely an amazing piece. And then you look at that. I mean, this is stuff that it's so unique and it's so different than the stuff that was coming out at the same time. I love his form. His form is, just amazing. And I love the way he drew muscles. Man, that's great. That's great. I think the strength of an artist comes in how well they can draw a rib cage. Because I feel like the trunk of the body is sort of like a third of what you're drawing, in the head. I say the trunk and the head are actually half of what you're drawing, half of the drawing. And it's just, when you have that down perfectly, and you can stylize it in your own way, there's just something amazing about it. And there's something very cartoony about his work. It's not like a fine art. He's not trying to get things exact. And I think that's where it kind of comes in with art, with comic book art. Is that, it's very cartoony. I mean, look at that weird anatomy of that arm. It's very cartoony. Whereas, Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci and the other artists of that time were kind of trying to be fine artists who could get, who were trying to draw as closely to life as they could. I mean, look at that. What a great piece. Great piece. I mean, I just adore that. And you have that overlapping. Great overlapping. Great foreshortening. Great perspective in the back. You don't see artists like him very often. And I've seen people try to copy his work, you know, try to draw or try to create art similar to him. And they always fail. And I think it's because kind of Durer was kind of doing his own thing, following his own proportions, following his own anatomy, doing his own thing. I mean, obviously he was following the anatomy that we use, but yeah, he's just... I love that. That's all line there, you know. If you look back there, I mean, that's all line. He's not coloring that in or brushing that in. He's using line. And he's just doing lines very close together to kind of get that illusion of, you know, solid black. He definitely was a doodler, I can tell you that. For sure. Loved using, you know, loved doing a lot of lines. You know, you're obviously going to see a lot of religious stuff in this because, you know, religion was very much a thing back then that people, you know, it was pretty much everything back then. So everything kind of has this religious overtone to it. But it looks rad as fuck. It looks so awesome. You know, and it has this very, like I said, this very cartoony feel to it. It reminds me a lot of Heinrich Clay. There's some Heinrich Clay, but the thing about Heinrich Clay was very gestural, whereas Durer was very precise. Man, look at those bricks. Look at the detail on the walls and on the cloth. Man. And I love it because you look at the beginning, he wasn't very confident, he wasn't very good, but then he just has this explosion of growth. I love a piece that has more black on it, but the black is created by strokes. Strokes, you know, line strokes. So we get into stuff like this. I don't really care much about that. I don't care about these smaller pieces. Kind of going through it all. But it feels very comic book like. Very much comic book like. Who was, I think it was Gustav Doré or whatever, who did the Dante's Inferno. You can definitely tell he was a fan of Durer. And how could you not be if you look at this work? I'm not quite certain if his work traveled with him. You know, if it traveled beyond just Germany. But, look at that. Absolutely love that detail. Look at that. What a great piece. And everything's right, you know, and it's so stylized. You know, you would never confuse his work with anybody else, and you would never confuse anybody else's work with his. Very dark tone to his work as well. A lot of people, you know, struggling. at that architecture. Look at that architecture. You gotta remember, like, only like maybe 100 years before this, people didn't even understand how perspective worked. And this guy comes in and he does things like this. I mean, look at these walls and the architecture, and I mean, he's working on buildings and architecture just as much as he is figures. And it's perfect. Anybody who can draw great animals, it's difficult to draw animals. And my honest opinion is that most people don't like to draw animals because they like to draw the human figure. So when you spend that time on an animal, it's pretty impressive. I also love how he curves the lines around. I didn't mention that. He curves the lines around. He brings contours out, to kind of give that texture. And you see the texture. It's a flat, or it's not flat, but it's not a rounded, structure. So he's using straight lines to kind of contour around that. That is a tree, so it's going around it. He's bringing the contours around it. He's using cross contours. If you look, whenever he does anatomy, like for instance, the baby's arm, you can see the contour going around the cylinder of the arm. That's how he kind of gets his form and his 3D around. And drapery, man. Drapery is really difficult. Very difficult to do. I mean, he's using little lines right there on that bicep there to go, this is round. And he's using little lines on that forearm to go, this is round as well. Great horse. Great horse. Looks like a dragon. I wish they had the way he did proportions in here. You'll have to look up Durer proportions. If it's in here, I'll show it to you. Oh, I love that sky with the line going across and the contours going around. What a great piece. Stuff I don't really care about. I don't care about stuff like that. Oh man, look at that. Look at that piece right there. Look at the anatomy on that. Absolute beautiful piece with the contours going around. And the beard and the hair. I mean, the detail on that. I mean, this is a guy who loved to draw. Absolutely adored it. I think he has maybe one of the best rib cages in the game. I mean, I'm serious. I love the way he draws rib cages, and the way and the pecs, and the muscles, and the what are they called? Those fucking muscles. I forget the name of them. By your abdomen, obliques, great obliques. I feel like Durer is one of those. Yeah, I don't remember how I found out about Durer. I think it might have been, maybe it was Proco I found out about, or Marshall Vandra I found out about Durer. I'm not sure. But, man, I'm happy I did. I wanted this book forever, and I was just like, I don't know if I want it. And then I bought it. I actually bought it because there was an art museum around me that had, just so happened the week that I went in, had Durer. And I was like, are you fucking kidding me? I'm going to see Durer stuff in real life? And that was just like mind-blowing. And I just sat there and I looked at it and I stared at it. And the funny thing is, it's not much bigger than these. At least the pieces that I saw are not much bigger than like this, which is pretty cool. So, I guess he's one of those artists that, when it comes to like reproducing it for books and stuff, it definitely works out. I just love his anatomy. I think that's the thing that I love about Durer the most, is his anatomy. It's very difficult to draw anatomy that well. I hate these sideways drawings. I get why they do it, for space purposes, but kind of wish that they had been like side to side or something. Then he would have been a lot smaller. And like I said, most of his pieces are at this size anyways. So it's reproduction purposes. I think we're going to go back. Yeah. He drew great rooms, too. I mean, a lot of his stuff looks like it's in one-point perspective. But still. Absolutely love that figure. There's something about that time where a lot of these artists didn't know how to draw female faces very well. I think it took a little while to kind of get to the point where they could draw very good female faces. And a lot of the times they would draw women, they would be much larger. Which I don't know, maybe if that was the thing of the time. Not quite certain. But they had like baby fat. They didn't have regular fat, they just had baby fat, which was pretty interesting. Because I look at, wow, look at that. What is this? I don't remember this. I have no idea what that is. But if you look at Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci, they didn't know how to draw women's faces very much. They kind of did this thing where they had like the large forehead and like it just, I don't know. Kind of skipping through this stuff because I don't quite care about it. A very difficult book to maneuver, that's for sure. I try to copy from this book and kind of figure out what he's doing, but it's very difficult when you have a piece like this. I usually go to the larger pieces. And the pieces that are like this. Great beard. I would not want to spend, however many hours on something like that. That's just me. Look at the detail on that. Look at the lines there going around. I mean, that's the great thing about Durer, is you can actually learn a lot from somebody like Durer, because he teaches you how to like do contours. As you see it, because there's a cut here, and he's showing that it's, it has like a circular feel to it. So he's kind of bringing those lines around Whereas, you know, those are more straight because it's a more solid surface. There's little things about drawing that when you figure it out, like figure out how important it is to bring cross contours into your work, you're gonna do very well for yourself. Great stuff. Not really into this stuff as much as I'm sort of into the figure stuff, but still interesting. It's still impressive. You know, I mean, that's how he did things like portraits. He wasn't trying to get the exact look. Of course, he has his, seems like his version of the Last Supper. He loved, sorry, he loved drawing the crucifixion. That was like, they loved doing that back in the day. And we get a close-up. I think it's the knife going in to get the blood of Christ. Some architecture ideas. We got some more of these woodcuts. I think that's the thing about trying to figure out perspective. I think there's like actually a thing on that. Like when they were trying to figure out perspective, I believe they would use something like that, and so maybe they figured. I'm not going to say to be certain because I'm not, you know, art history is not my. If you look at it, looks like he's trying to figure out perspective. Oh, sorry, my hands. Stupid. He's trying to figure out perspective there. Yeah, my one gripe with this book is I wish that they would. Oh, here's his proportion thing. So, which I'm happy that they included this. So, you know, there's his proportions. I'm not quite certain. I think his thing was 8 heads high. And the crotch is not quite in the middle area. It's a little bit lower. Or I'm sorry. Yeah, it's a little bit lower, but the pelvis is like, so the legs are longer. Very interesting proportions. And I'm not quite certain how many heads tall it is. It might be 8. So yeah, that's Albert Durer. Very interesting guy, for sure. I want to find that one piece again that I really enjoyed. If I don't find it, I'll just end the video or put it on something else. But yeah, fucking amazing artist. German artist who inspired a lot of people, I feel like. I mean, he's great. Absolutely amazing. I probably won't be able to find that piece. But, you know, it's always cool to kind of find new artists and people who will inspire you. And I definitely think Durer is one of those guys who just, you know, you just look at his work and you just go, man, that is great. And I mean, you see that growth. I'm not gonna be able to find that piece. I know it. But you see his growth, and it's just absolutely amazing. There it is. I absolutely love that piece. And his technique is right there on the paper. It's right there on the page, and you can learn a lot from artists like Durer. You can learn a lot from artists, like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, and you can learn a lot from artists like John Buscema. So it doesn't matter what time period it is. And you can definitely see that Durer is not one of those guys who had a very fine arts background. At least it doesn't feel like he did, because his stuff is off, but it's perfect enough where it actually looks better, I think, than like very, very fine art. But it could just be that he was so good at doing fine art and learned fine art to perfection that he just sort of went, I'm going to change things up to kind of have my own style, which is very possible. So, man, I mean, you take a look at that piece, and that kind of just, to me, just kind of explains the greatness of Durer. So, yeah, I always like showing people new artists, or just artists that people don't really talk about, or kind of talking about artists that people do know about, and they just go, man, you know, I haven't seen Durer in quite some time, but Durer is in like I have a list of artists that I call my art parents, or artists I want to learn from, and Durer's on that list. Because I find his art just to be so awesome, and you definitely can see, that Heinrich Clay was sort of using those contour lines that Durer was using, and kind of perfecting them in his own way. So while Durer's stuff sometimes looks a little bit stiff, it has a lot of life to it. So that's Durer. If you do get this book, open up to page 211. You will see that piece. I think that piece is absolutely amazing. I also love that in the background, that the room, it starts to turn, so he kind of is going around. It's amazing. So yeah, that's Durer.